Hello, hello, everyone. Laura, do you have hosting access before we start? Keith, I see your face. Thank you all. Dan Frost, so great to connect with you. This is great. You're official.
I'm always official.
Hi, Karen. How are you? Thanks for opening up your screen. All right, we're going to get started in a minute because we're going to have this great session coming out. But if you see anybody from the screen that you're not familiar with, or if you want to compliment Kathleen West Gives or anyone else on the screen, please, by all means, feel free to include it on the chat. My colleague Laura and I from Common Sense will get started shortly. This is so great. I'm so happy everybody's here. Yes. And Kathleen, I don't know how you did that, but the fact that you can just do that, or if you're continuously like moving your glasses back and forth is very impressive regardless. So thank you for doing that. All right, Laura, how are you doing on your end before I share my screen? You're good?
You might be fine, but
I am doing good. I was going to share the presentation. If that's okay? Or did you
By
want
all means, yeah, let's get started. So
to?
it is 1:30, everyone. We are going to share this presentation with you. My name is Jamie Nunez. I am the Western Regional Manager at Common Sense. I've seen a number of you that I've worked with in the past. I'm joined here by Laura Ordonez. She oversees everything and all things related to podcasts for Common Sense, rating, reviewing, determining what is the best podcast for what. Today, we're going to be discussing how you can use podcasts effectively to engage your students. The idea behind the next 21 minutes together is not to overload you with theory, but rather to provide you with some very applicable podcast list and resources and overall kind of how-tos on how to engage with this particular space. So that is in essence what it is. A few just quick reminders. If you want to change the slide, Laura, for the next slide. If you haven't signed in already, feel free to take down the bit.ly, the site, and don't forget to sign in for this course or this session together. So I'll leave it up for about another 10 seconds if you haven't done so already. And then I guess, Laura, we'll just acknowledge each other's presence. Thank you for being in my life today as a professional colleague, and appreciate your lighting background. So I'll acknowledge kind of your overall aura today. I don't know what if you hosted a podcast, what it would be titled, or if you already have a podcast. But I really always appreciate your disposition, your canter. So
Thank you, Jamie. And can everyone see can you see my screen okay? Is it?
Yep. All right, lovely. Let's get started if you're open to it. Laura, you want to go on to the next slide? I will defer to you.
Yes.
At this point. Here's the idea. I think we want to make sure that we start with just an understanding of what we're trying to sort of do, right? So the question I think for you all is, how are podcasts actually beneficial in classrooms if you're a librarian or other learning environments? Like, take a moment now in the chat to think about what are the best use cases? Why actually incorporate audio or even podcasts into your classroom or into your learning environment? If you can take a moment, that'd be great. You can also unmute as well if you prefer that format. And I know it's lunch, so if you ate a heavy lunch and it's hard to type with your fingers, or you just can't speak because you just had too much good food, we can just ponder and reflect on it. So
Might it assist a student if you've given like a lecture or something, and if you record it and then you can kind of replay it on the podcast?
absolutely, Christopher. I love that use case. I think it's a wonderful insight, right? Like you share some information and then you can reaffirm it using the various podcasts that are out there. You can record yourself and create a podcast-like experience for your students. 100%, yeah. Anyone else?
Almost like a college atmosphere, so to speak.
That's right. Yeah. All right, Laura, I'll defer and turn it over to you. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for leading that, Jamie. So this is definitely a topic I'm very passionate about and I think is very helpful, hopefully, to everyone on this session today. So why podcasts? What makes that different than any other form of media that you may be using in the classroom. I think radio used to be that kind of original audio or just storytelling in general, right? But now with podcasts and the really emergence of podcasts in the kids space that are made for kids and for their learning, there's so many different unique things about this medium. Number one, it allows an ability to what I call connect and reflect. So I always like to pose a question, which is, what was your most memorable experience with audio? I always think about different stories family members told and what those voices sounded like, or maybe a morning talk show that you listen to, a radio show, right? What was your first impactful thought or experience with audio? Most of the times when we talk about what that sounds like and why that connected is because audio is a very intimate experience. And that is what helps kind of create that connection with kids in the classroom. They can help kids connect to their interpretations of what things may look like or their experiences, right? Just like a book, they may not be reading, but they're listening and then they're translating to that into what they're experiencing. Different sorts of accents or vocal inflections or tones, right? That may connect them to their grandparents or family members they never knew, but stories were passed down, their culture. It also allows them to reflect on other experiences. So other kids' experiences, other families' experiences, other people's experiences, and what that looks like, what that sounds like. And I think that offers a really unique way of connecting with kids and their imagination. So it allows their imagination to grow and continuously keep going as they're learning in a way that maybe some visual mediums may not. So again, it's a screen-free entertainment and learning tool. It allows that creativity. It allows that critical thinking. It's good for both co-listening. So in the classroom, that co-listening environment together, or if you're doing stations, they can listen individually depending on, the age range in the classroom. And again, as I was saying, the diversity is not only in voice, but there's so much as far as diversity in perspective, storytelling, culture. You can see maybe 10 different science podcasts that will be told from different voices, from different experiences, from different angles, right? That different kids can connect to. And those can all be used in different places in the classroom. And last but not least, of course, is they're very accessible. You can listen to podcasts pretty much anywhere. You don't have to have a ton of technology. They're free. There are multiple ways to listen. You can control the speed. Usually on most listening platforms, you can either speed up or slow down. And they're really a low lift in that sense. So underneath that, where does that help in the actual classroom? Like what's actually going on? How does this improve kids' learning? Well, there's been a lot of research out there. I'm going to link to this article that we're referring to from this image here. But what we know is that within listening, it allows for more imaginative and critical thinking to come to life for kids, right? And that really starts to happen with listening and reading comprehension. For younger kids, a lot of the times, as we all know, they are still decoding a lot of words. They're still trying to find the context to a lot of words, really, understanding like when they're actually reading out loud, that is great. But what podcasts can help, amplify in that space, especially for the younger ones, is it gives them context in listening to these stories. So the decoding does not take away from what's actually happening in the story, what's actually happening in the narrative, what's actually happening in, if it's like a science or history podcast, what's actually happening in that content form. So it does help to amplify reading and listening comprehension. Something that's really huge about podcasts is that they help teach social emotional learning skills. Now, this happens on two foundational levels. Very simply, so many of the podcasts that are out there, especially that we recommend on Common Sense Media, and you'll find that in our ratings and reviews of these podcasts, is that a lot of social emotional learning is embedded within any podcast you find for kids, whether it's storytelling, whether it's science, whether it's math, whether it's history. There is still that social emotional learning element coming in. And we've heard from other teachers who use podcasts in the classroom that they love to listen to things like certain science podcasts like Wow in the World or Tumble science podcasts for kids, because they're not only learning science, they're also learning literacy, and they're also learning social emotional skills. So they're getting that all in one classroom. So that helps for teachers who are teaching multiple subjects, but it also kind of helps create this consistency throughout each classroom they're going to, or each subject they're learning about. And also, we just know that there's been some studies that actually listening to storytelling, hearing someone tell a story, can really help lower social, or it's been associated with lower social anxiety and more positive feelings of self. That's connected to this article as well. And I thought that was just really interesting, because when you hear someone tell a story, you kind of get to that intimate space of, wow, okay, I'm listening to someone else's experience. That makes me feel like my experience can count too. So that is another really great tool. And as we know, active listening is really huge in social emotional learning. Of course, can facilitate difficult discussions within current events and civic issues, which we know now has been really largely placed in the classroom and placed on teachers. So that can be a tool to help guide teachers through that. Provide mental health resources. That's again kind of going back to social emotional learning, and support habits, routines, and activities. So maybe it's middle of the day and you're listening to a podcast to calm down or to have like a rest period. Maybe it's the morning and that's how you hear your announcements or your current events. So it can really help facilitate those activities. So where and how to listen, on our site, on our ratings and reviews, we have a listen on section that kind of gives like the top places to be able to listen. And when you click that, it will go straight to that podcast. We put the little hearts next to Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, because that's, I think, something where a lot of teachers are like, where do I go? Is it, I don't know where to start. You know, you can listen on a web browser. You can listen on a tablet. You can listen on the phone. There are so many different places you can listen. And Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts seem to be really strongly like used in the classrooms by teachers that we've talked to, mainly because, right, a lot of Chromebooks are being used. That's really easy to get to. And then also for Apple Podcasts, if iPads are being used in the classroom, you can also get to that through a web browser. And just a side note, we do also, Common Sense does curate the kids and family space in Apple Podcasts. So we're about to launch a space that really kind of allows educators to come in and have a first look at certain podcasts where maybe this is where you want to start, or educational podcasts. So that can be a hub for you as well. So again, just going back to our ratings and reviews, I'm sure many of you have seen these on different media formats. Now we have this for podcasts. So this kind of helps you guide you where to go, where to start, depending on what you're looking for. That also, and then obviously we go into our content grid, which we have here. You can see what the educational value is. A lot of the times what we're doing in that space is giving you information about what's on the website to support some of these episodes and the full podcast, because a lot of these podcasts have those activities, have curriculum already there for teachers, have teachers in mind and kids in mind first. So those activities are already there for you. So it's not as heavy as a lift. You know, what I'm really proud of us for doing is really launching this diverse representations rubric, which really helps to understand, yeah, maybe if I'm looking between 4 different history podcasts, which one has the certain, you know, element I'm looking for, which one tells a story through a certain voice or lens that I'm looking at, right? And we have that for all different types of podcasts. And then you can also just kind of evaluate what positive message is and what's kind of going in here into each episode within that podcast. And also to help with your lesson plans, at the bottom of all of our podcasts, we have the genre there, which is helpful. The average runtime is something that we wanted to put in there specifically for educators in knowing if they want to put a full episode in. Here's the average runtime. Will that fit into my lesson plan and where? And then also the website is connected. So what are some practical examples of how to use a podcast in the classroom? This is like the nitty gritty. So I wanted to give you just 3 kind of really simple options of what this looks like and, you know, some of what we've seen some other teachers do in the classroom. Number 1, wow in the world. I saw a couple smiles from what I can see with yes, I see some thumbs up. Wow in the world. That is a point of entry for a lot of teachers. It is an amazing podcast. It's a science-based podcast, but when we're talking about really having that social emotional learning and that literacy aspect of it, Wow in the World is so great for that because the characters are so fun. They're so exciting. They're definitely made for kids to want to listen to, and kids do connect with them. One of our teachers that we've talked to, Carol Patterson, she talks about how her kids are just like obsessed with these characters, but they're learning the entire time and they're learning the literacy the entire time and how the characters interact, because one is a little more laid back and very rational. The other wants to experiment with things. So they're learning how to work together. So within that, this is more academic based. I call that like with science, history, math, things like that. What's a fun way to add that into the classroom? Well, Wow in the World is such a great example. If you go to their website, which is linked on the slides, and that will, I think everyone will have access to that if I'm correct, Jamie.
Yeah, we'll put it in the doc.
Great, thank you. I just did a little screenshot right here to show you associated with each episode. They have articles, they have conversation starters, they have activities, they have games. So what you could do is really even make a week out of one episode or multiple weeks out of one episode where every day, maybe you listen again, or you listen to only part of the podcast, which is great because you can do that. You can timestamp and say, we're just going to listen to this section of this episode, and you pull that out. And then you have these conversation starters, or they read the article and talk about how that relates to what they heard on the podcast. So this is a great example of how a lot of these podcasts have these activities available for you. Media literacy is a really great one, especially for those in the late elementary to early middle school. Where they're really trying to understand, like, how am I relating to the news that's out there, especially with all the technology and the social media, right? We cannot prevent them from seeing what's on the news and what's in current events, nor do we really want to necessarily, but we want to make sure it's getting to them in a way that they don't feel overwhelmed and scared. The 10 News is really great for that. It's a great example for each episode, as I've kind of detailed here. There is a list of resources, of sources that like journalists do that talk about what they talked about in that episode. They source everything in that episode. Not only is that a great way to kind of build out maybe a larger lesson plan for the week on what they talked about at the beginning of the week, but it's also a way of teaching media literacy. How are you looking to make sure you're fact checking? What does that look like? What does a reliable source look like? And showing them those actionable steps and how to do that. They also have a YouTube channel that pulls out parts of the episode, like trivia on the 10. And again, the YouTube channel will be listed, if they have one, in our listen on section at the top of our review. And that's a really fun way to just kind of like test what they learned without testing them in such a like strict way. It's fun. It's trivia. They can do it together. They can shout out answers. So this is just another way of really engaging with that and getting them interested in civic engagement as well. And a third one, when, we talked about social emotional learning, I think that Stoop Kids Stories is a great one for the 8 and up, maybe even 7 and up crowd, depending on your classroom. It's a narrative podcast that really goes through what kids in late elementary to all of middle school go through in working through situational things with their peers, right? Communicating with adults, reflection and accepting of self and others, empathy, compassion, all of these things we talk about when we're talking about social learning, emotional learning on a very general basis are all within these stories that are told. But what's beautiful about this, as we were talking about earlier, is that this tells it from the lens of Black children who are interacting with different types of children in their classrooms, but it tells it from their lens. And there's so many other, shows that are narrative like that, podcasts that are narrative like that, where you see a different lens and kids can say, oh, wow, this is really interesting. So one of the options here in adding this into the classroom is even pulling from our site. We have Talk to Your Kids About, and it says families, but this is really for educators and for any other larger space where you're having these discussions with kids. So really talking about like, what did that look like for that family? What do different families look like? Because different families are represented in this podcast. What would you do in that situation? Really pulling out these discussion questions and even putting kids together from different experiences and having those moments to be able to like say what they would do and share their experience and share how they relate or maybe don't, but thought that was really cool. So this is a really great space for discussion. So those were just really 3 basic examples. There's so many other directions you can, of course, go with podcasts, but I think the best thing to do is start from step 1. What is the first step? And that's really just entering with a podcast and entering in saying, I'm going to try this. We've talked to a few different, we did Games for Change about a month ago, and we had a few teachers on who have used podcasts in the classrooms, and they have so many different ways they've done that, but they started by just doing it, right? And they started by just doing it and exemplifying that with their kids of, we're going to try something new. Let's see how this works. Like, let's see, what do you like about this? What is difficult about just the audio? Maybe we need to pair that up with some reading, or maybe we pair it up with this, but it gives you a space to kind of learn together with your classroom and with your kids. And when you're doing that and modeling that together, I think there's such a great connection. So where do you start? We have our lists on commonsensemedia.org, which are kind of like the best of podcast lists with different topics, but I thought these were the 3 most important. Common Sense Podcast Selections is a list of their SEAL selections, which we kind of rank as the best of the best in the podcast space. Those will continue to grow, so you can kind of keep pulling from there as you see fit. We have kids podcasts that promote learning. Those are really great. That's where we really have, educators, librarians, counselors in mind, those working with kids in the educational space. And then also pulled out our social emotional learning list, because that's something that we really focused on today. And I think that's also a great place to start. I know it's a lot, or it feels like a lot sometimes when you're adding something new into the classroom, but step 1, find a podcast that you think that your kids might relate to. Go to one of our lists, kind of look at a review and see, we're pretty detailed about like, what does that look like? What does that sound like? Who's represented? And I say, just pick one and maybe pick one episode or a part of an episode and go from there and see how that kind of adapts in your classroom. But the beauty of it is that there's so many ways to innovate in that space. And I hope that at least some of these examples were really helpful for you today. And just hand it back over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks a lot. And so what we will do is send over, I believe, through the Zoom, this event piece of the deck for you all to just kind of take with you so you can enjoy that. I think we'll close off with a simple question for you, which is this: what are some of the unique use cases that you all have when you listen to, and what are the things that could potentially be helpful in your classroom? If you take a moment to reflect on that and really think about how your lessons are actually adhering to the different modalities that kids are engaging with in the space. It would be really helpful. Unfortunately, we don't have the chat feature open. Otherwise, I'd send you all the deck. Laura, I don't know if you have the chat feature that enables you to share a link to everyone. But
I
if, yeah,
believe I do. Let me,
if you
yes.
can send the deck over the chat, that'd be great. With the minute we have remaining, if you wanted to close to the next slide, if you obviously want to take a minute to just provide your feedback, not only to the session, but provide feedback for us if there's anything we can help you with personally this year. I work with the school district on the for the entire year, and happy to help you out or be an advocate for you on that end.
And I just put the link to the deck in the chat for everyone.
Right, so as you're filling out that feedback, if there are any questions, feel free to unmute or share them in the chat if you'd like. I'll give you a chance to connect now. So.
And I'm seeing a few in the chat right now. Jamie, while people are doing the survey, should we maybe just
sure.
over a few?
Mm-hmm.
So this one is really, I like this one. What is the benefit of podcast over YouTube? There's not always a benefit. If you go to only some podcasts have a YouTube presence. Some, it's really just the podcast on YouTube. So that's just another way that the kids or parents or families or educators can listen together. But some do have like little visual elements, like we showed you with the 10 News, where they'll pull out sections of the podcast and make that visual or make it just a little more exciting in its own segment. So I wouldn't say there's a benefit over, but I would say that that's really, it helps in addition to. Let's see. Where will the slides be? We got that done. Oh, what grade band does the WOW in the World apply to? So I believe WOW in the World. So the way that we do our reviews on the media site is is by age. So it's age, that one is, I believe, age 8+ or 7+. And so we do that all based off of child development research in our rubric for that.
Yeah, I think the language can be elevated at some point. So for that podcast, I mean, from when I listened to it, it'd certainly be helpful to just break it down into chunks.
Yeah.
Guy Raz is really great at explaining quite a number of things. But yeah, that late elementary to middle school, I mean, even 9th grade, you can potentially use that as a great podcast. Great, I love that list. So.
And just as one like last side note too, while I'm looking over some more of these questions, I will say that we are also amplifying, we're going to be amplifying bilingual podcasts that you can also use in the classroom, which is great if you have a bilingual classroom or you're trying to teach different languages or Spanish. So that's really great too. Like I know Tumble has Tumble en Español, which is really great. So that's also something to look at as well.
All right, wonderful, folks. Unless there's any other questions or you'd like to share any of your insights, we'll give you back 3 minutes of your life. Hopefully you had a great lunch and this was beneficial to you. Thank you all for being alive, and thank you for continuing the work that you do as educators or site leaders at your site. Laura, as always, it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for your presence today. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
All right, you
Thanks,
all have
Jamie.
a good one. Bye, you all.
Bye.